All right, so let's talk about Game of the Year because it's on everybody's mind. A lot of great games have come out this year. And so the question is, what do you choose? What do you choose for Game of the Year? And so the question in the chat was, will Rebirth get Game of the Year? And I don't know. At the Game Awards, I don't know what it'll get at Golden Joystick, any of that stuff. But here's what I do know. I feel like we get Game of the Year wrong a lot of times. I feel like when we talk about Game of the Year, we're always thinking and talking about what's the highest rated game of the year. What's the one that sold the most? Rather than what I think is what it means to be Game of the Year. You see, Game of the Year is different from the Oscar for Best Picture. Best Picture is arguably the thing that is the best. But to say that something is that thing of the year means that it has some kind of level of cultural significance. So there's a lot of great frontrunners this particular year for Game of the Year. But let's look at some of the past Game of the Years, right? I'm reminded particularly of the last time Final Fantasy VII came out in Remake in 2020. A lot of people put that one up for Game of the Year, but was it Game of the Year? I don't know. It also came out in a time with Last of Us Part 2, which is like an all-timer in storytelling and all that kind of stuff. It was also about a story during a pandemic, which is pretty fitting for 2020. But for 2020, when I think about Game of the Year, when I think of something that moved the medium forward, something that had cultural significance, I think of Animal Crossing, right? I think of Animal Crossing more than anything else for 2020 because it was a cultural and worldwide phenomenon during a time when the world was shut down. I held an Easter service in Animal Crossing. People had get-togethers where they would bring their players into other people's islands and all that kind of stuff as a way of staying connected. And I think when I think of 2020, I will always remember it as the year that Animal Crossing came out, even though two of my favorite games of all time, Remake and Last of Us 2, also came out that year. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about expanding the conversation about Game of the Year. Was Animal Crossing arguably the best game of 2020? No, not by a long shot. But I think it was the most significant game of 2020. So Animal Crossing would probably get that from me. So when it comes to 2024, the question is, what game has cultural relevance? A lot of games make their cases, right? Astrobot is an amazing game. I think that culturally and for game space, it has an argument, not just because of its polish and not just because of the things that it does as far as a level design, but it is pretty remarkable that this game took only a couple of years to create with 70 people, or something along those lines. Short development time, small development group, or smaller relatively development team. I think that there's something to be said about that when we're having AAA games in and like overworking and time crunch and all that kind of stuff. Astrobot makes a really important point. Let's look at Wukong next. Wukong is a really, really good game, culturally significant, particularly to China. And that is certainly one of the things that really drives its sales, but it also was really significant here in the States and in other parts of the world. But to China, this was a monumental moment because it really very well displayed one of their unique myths, one of their unique stories. And I think that is culturally significant. Is it Game of the Year caliber? Maybe, maybe not. But it does have a case for that. You look at Metaphor, JRPG, certainly pushing the genre a little bit forward. It has turn-based style as well as a really pleasing artistic style. And apparently the gameplay, I have not played it yet, but the gameplay and the story is really resonant. It also addresses a lot of themes that the world currently is discussing. Things about race and governance and economics and discrimination, all that kind of stuff. I think that's a really important game from that sort of thing. But you know me, right? You know that I'm the kind of guy that's like, and certainly if you've watched any of my streams, you know that my vote is for Rebirth. And the reason that I say that it's Rebirth for me is simply this. Number one, this game does things that evoke that 1997 sensibility in a modernized way. The idea of an open world, but also linear progression. Everybody wants this broad open world, but if something's too open, can it tell a proper story? this is something that really got muddied down in a lot of great open world games for me. But I feel like Rebirth keeps you just focused enough amidst all of this freedom, minigame and all this other stuff, to really tell a powerful and impactful story. That's what we're seeing on this stream. I think that from a presentation standpoint, it is amazing and jaw-dropping. I think that's only going to become more so when the PlayStation 5 Pro comes out and we get to see it in 60 frames per second and in graphics mode, which I think is going to be really, really meaningful. But even beyond that, when we look at the story itself, there is a significant story that's being told here that is timely and contextual. We talk about these things on stream, stories about grief, stories about what to do when you are powerless against those in power. It's a story where people are reckoning with the worst things that have happened to them, and it's repackaging that in a way that we can all kind of take some lessons from. There's a mental health conversation, there's psychology conversation, certainly religious conversations, and also bonds of friendship. I think that what they do as far as open world and teasing out what could be just amazing in Part 3 is really important here. I think that the biggest thing that Rebirth does, though, is it takes concepts that were profoundly important from a story and a gameplay perspective in 1997, and it repackages them in a way that new audiences and old audiences can embrace. For me, it is the perfect bridge between nostalgia and pushing the medium forward. For me personally, that's why this is Game of the Year. Also, it's the one that has lasted the longest. It is no longer a victim of recency bias, right? Because we're still talking about this game. And the fact that it's still in the conversation 9 months later, I mean, that's something to be said. Metaphor, as great as it is, simply because it was released at the end of the year, doesn't have that level of staying power for this year, at least not by awards season. So maybe that's an unfair advantage that Rebirth would have. It's still in kind of the consciousness. People are still talking about this game, which is amazing. The final thing that I would say, though, and this is probably something to consider when it comes to talking about Rebirth specifically, it's very well possible that Final Fantasy VII Trilogy, Remake Trilogy, will get its flowers when Part 3 releases. It'll win some categories, probably Best Sound and Best Soundtrack, maybe Best Performer for like GOTY and Bree, and who knows who else may be nominated by awards season. I hope Barrett's is, for sure. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, was given some good awards, but it like swept with Return of the King Part 3 because it was such a monumental achievement to take this old text and to repackage it in a way that got people really excited about the whole story. And Return of the King Part 3 got the awards for all three of those movies, and I think that that's what Final Fantasy VII Re-3, the re-reunion, I think that is going to be the one that's like, okay, we were given this 500-hour plus adaptation of this 1997 classic in a way that surprised, delighted, and absolutely rocked us. And I think that once that game comes out in its full package, I think that people are going to be like, wow, that is quite the undertaking. So anyway, that's my take on what Game of the Year is. I think that it needs to be about more significant games rather than successful games. And that's why I led with Animal Crossing. But that's my thought. What are your thoughts? I'd be interested to know, what are your criteria for Game of the Year? And this year, what is a culturally significant game versus just a successful game? All right, sound off in the chat, definitely. And when we inevitably turn this into a clip or a video, I hope that you'll leave a comment as well. All right, there we go.